the pace of progression and why it's important to find your individual pace, not a pace that is dictated to you by someone else or an external system. I'm fresh out of a realization over the weekend because Friday, definitely in terms of energy levels for me, was already, it had been kind of quite a busy week, quite a demanding week. And I pushed myself to engage with something that, in fact, yeah, timing wise, for me, it was really calling for a kind of pause point and a gathering of energy. So, if we're bringing all of these analogies back to singing, I frame it in terms of if we have a phrase that we're trying to tackle, if we're not sufficiently prepared and supported with the breath and energy that we need to actually see that phrase through, we're not going to reach our intended goal. We're not going to be able to complete that phrase or that portion of the journey. And that day for me probably would have been calling for a pause point, and I pushed through. And I think there's a difference between recognizing points that call for you to draw on a well of inner resource and strength that you've been building because you've actually been doing preparatory work to enable you to stretch yourself and to challenge yourself. And when recognizing the difference between that and actually your body, your mind, your emotional space, your spirit, everything giving you feedback that actually the point of the pathway that you're at is a pause or reflection or integration piece, that actually that's where you are coming back into your internal landscape to do a check-in and actually assess, where am I and what is my inner terrain like, and how stable do I feel in this inner terrain? Is it stable enough for me to be able to resource energy from this space, or is there actually a kind of pause point and integration needed to recalibrate and to recharge? Because otherwise we are pushing forward from this place of instability, and we're actually borrowing energy, at a point that we don't have that available to us. So we're stealing from the next day. And I'm speaking about this, with specific to what I've been working on over the last week, and just projects that I've been kind of trying to move the needle forward with. But let's connect with the analogy of singing and voice work as a useful reference point, because we're thinking about the physicality of vocalization and expressing energy and what is required to support that in terms of what we do with our training and what we do to enhance our kind of performance capacity. We can't be at that kind of peak performance level all the time. We need to have points of rest and integration. And if you were to, again, translate this into the space of physical training or the work that athletes do to prepare for what is their, peak performance days, in whatever context that might be, whether it's a competitive environment or, just intensive training days. There's the other building that goes on around that, which is not necessarily at that level of intensity, but there's also rest days built into that framework, and those are essential because they allow time for the body to recover, but also the mind as well. And I was speaking to this last week about this kind of relationship of the psychological kind of space around mindset stuff that I've been working on with my own bits and pieces, and then also the emotional space and trying to understand the relationship between the two. And often there's a kind of catch up bit needed with the emotional piece, because if we're really charging through and engaging with kind of cognitive intellectual stuff all the time, and we're not giving ourselves enough room to get the emotional part of ourselves kind of catching up and on board, and also checking in, with that part to assess, is there anything I can do to support you to feel comfortable about the change, and the rate of change and the direction of travel, because, there might be resistance there, and that emotional aspect might have been an area that has kind of held you back in the past because you've not felt safe enough to go forwards and to actually take action and to move on to the next step. And that's okay if we're aware of that pattern and we have things built into our system that actually allow us to continually be coming back into that inner space and checking in. And if it requires spending a bit more time to engage with that and to not indulge in a kind of like, let's just sit back and do nothing, which is obviously kind of counterproductive to forward momentum and continued engagement with taking steps towards your trajectory or your goal, but also acknowledging that it's okay to take a breath. In fact, it's necessary to take a breath. So it's a pause for thought, for integration, to reflect, also to energize. And you might have heard me speak about this before, but intention, action, expression, if that is our kind of sequence of movement, or our kind of like feedback loop that we're trying to achieve, there's also steps or spaces in between these kind of anchor points as well. And I think we forget to actually express that when we are talking about journey. So for those of you that are visual, if that's our kind of our pattern of movement with, peaks and troughs, ups and downs, but we're actually bringing it back to digestible stepwise motion. There's the steps we take, but then there's also the orientation points in between, and that orientation doesn't have to be equivalent to stopping everything and getting the sun lounger out and then actually resting on our laurels of that we've taken one step and that's fine, I don't need to do anything else. But if we're engaging in any kind of personal development process, or we're trying to work towards something, or we're in the middle of a project and we've got milestones to reach, we want to enjoy the process as well. And there's nothing worse than dragging yourself along when you know that you're actually lagging, and that really that you actually need a moment just to recalibrate. And if we don't acknowledge that part of us that is asking for that and communicating that, then we're definitely shutting an element of our communication down. We're saying to it, you don't matter, and we're denying a part of ourselves, that part might need additional support. It might need additional time. It might need actually to learn or adopt a new way of working that is less demanding, or come up with a new system or approach to strengthen it so that it can come on board with these other aspects of yourself that are kind of ready to go, more assertive, and are maybe putting undue pressure on these other elements of yourself, because it's like, come on, where are you? You're lagging behind. But we want all of us to arrive at our next check-in point. We want all of ourselves to arrive at our destination. And if our sense is that we are trying to work in a way that is holding space for the fullest expression of ourselves to be engaging with this kind of forward momentum and this trajectory, then there is an acknowledgement that there might be other parts that step forward to lead at points where there are other aspects of ourselves that are actually needing that additional room or time or leadership, even from these other qualities or archetypes, to kind of demonstrate, like, I'm seeing a gap here in my knowledge or understanding or implementation of something in relation to my emotional self or my spiritual self or my social self. And that's great, because we then have a clear understanding of, I'm not, progressing maybe at a rate that I want to, or I'm not achieving things that I want to achieve within my construct or timeline. But then we have continued to engage with all of these different elements so that we actually have clarity on which area needs the most attention and support, and also which areas kind of activate each other, support each other, or maybe if there's an overemphasis in one area, it kind of suppresses another aspect of ourselves to our detriment, that we're not giving enough room for that part to actually be present and be heard and acknowledged and have a say about, this is a great point actually to take stock and to, yeah, stop and smell the roses for a moment. And as I say, the more we can work with this navigation of moving outwardly and coming back in a kind of spiral fashion, the easier that reflex becomes, the more fluid that process is. And actually the blocks, or the perception of the blocks that are there between these two spaces, we start to meet them more frequently. We start to learn what triggers them and where they stem from. And if we are engaging with those and communicating with them and trying to get to know them, to befriend them, to soften them so that they don't feel overwhelming, like pillars that are, stopping us from actually moving anywhere, that we're getting kind of trapped in between. Then overall, we are building this quality of resilience and also this capacity to self-resource. And in the process of this kind of cultivation practice, we're also gaining amazing insight into who we are, what makes us tick, and knowing ahead of time, I'm starting to wane, my energy's starting to go, right, it must be time for a pause, so that the next step I take can be fully aligned, fully energized, and impactful.